listening to The Nature of Story. I'm Michael Neelsen. Thanks so much for joining me again for another hour of conversation on storytelling. Holy shnikes, this is a great episode. Not because of me, but because of the guest. Barry Lam is the host and creator of one of my favorite new podcasts in the last year. It's called Hi-Phi Nation, and the Phi is spelled P-H-I. And his tagline for the show is that it's a podcast that turns stories into ideas. He's melding philosophy and storytelling. If you know me, that's right up my alley. He even interviewed Errol Morris, my favorite documentary filmmaker, for one of the episodes. But they're all story based. So if you're a fan of like Radiolab or The Moth or This American Life, any of those story-based podcasts, and you also like thinking about big ideas, you have to become a subscriber and you have to listen to Barry's podcast. He also has, beyond the podcast, a very impressive resume, a very impressive about me. I'm just going to read it right off the website here. Barry Lam. Barry is an alum of UC Irvine and former program director and general manager at KUCI 88.9 FM. He has a PhD in philosophy at Princeton University. He's currently associate professor of philosophy at Vassar College. So that's his day job, as he describes it, that he has to manage outside of producing this podcast. But we recorded this conversation quite a bit ago. I'm late on getting it up, and we talk about the prospect of a season 2. And as of the recording of this intro now, I know that he's well into production on season 2, so we all have that to look forward to. But we get into some really awesome stuff here. We get into everything from, is it possible to be an objective storyteller, an objective narrator, or is everything inherently subjective? Is confidence good or bad? We talk about so much. I mean, it is a real treat if you're a fan of stories and if you're a fan of big ideas. He even posits the possibility that storytelling can be a means itself to pushing forward the sciences. That story itself as a practice could actually become a tool to push scientific knowledge forward. And that just really excited me. So I'm not going to... You guys are going to enjoy this. So thank you so much for tuning in again. Without further ado, I give you Barry Lam. So Barry, just tell me a little bit about kind of what started you on this path. First of all, I mean, I've listened to the whole podcast. I think it's fantastic. I'm an amateur philosophy buff on my own, but I really enjoyed the podcast as a piece of storytelling. So what kind of sent you on this journey?
Sure, I am a philosophy professor at Vassar College, and I had spent whatever it was at that point, 7-8 years teaching. And, doing what philosophy professors do, which is just kind of writing essays for your peers. And then one week I was asked to go down to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. This was in 2012, so it was a few years ago now. And it was for like a one-day seminar to teach. It was a seminar on like teaching philosophy, in this case to Army cadets.
Wow.
Right. And you hear like Army cadets, like what do they care about it, right? But it turned out that it's really important to the military academies and Army in particular to have philosophy for the future leaders of the Army, of the military. All of ROTC requires philosophy. They require philosophy at West Point, and they just wanted to know a more effective way to pursue that. And so when I was sitting there, basically most of the people who teach philosophy are officers who have come back from the wars, and they liked philosophy. At that point, it was winding down in the Afghanistan war. We were winding down in Iraq, and there were these guys who had spent 10 years fighting in these wars, moving up from lieutenant to major, and in their 30s, late 30s, and there was nothing more they wanted to do, talking to them, than to study and write philosophy. They were all competing to try to get funding from the Department of Defense to get their masters and PhDs, and they were teaching at West Point. I'm like, this is weird, right?
Yeah.
It's really weird to sit around, you know, big. They're all in uniform, right? They all came from the wars, and they can't stop talking about the ethics of killing, in
Right.
warfare. And I thought that's a great story, right?
Yeah.
It's a great story to think what would it be to actually have the experience of fighting in the wars that we've had for like over a decade, and now to come back and have one of those soldiers be like giving their philosophical reflections on the morality of killing in warfare and so on. And at that point, I had already been a big fan of all of these story-driven shows like This American Life and so on. And none of them really had this bent of, going from story to big ideas.
Yeah.
Like just sometimes they do, but not always. And I thought that's the kind of show that I would want to listen to. Fast forward, 3 years, I had a sabbatical. And, what could I do? I could either just keep doing what I was doing and write, essays that nobody would really read, or I could just try to pursue this dream that I had, which is to integrate stories with philosophy. So integrate storytelling with big ideas. And philosophy is wide ranging, right? So it's not like just ethics of killing or ethics in general. There's like the nature of the mind, what is knowledge, all of these big questions. And, nobody had done that. And so I decided, okay, I'll buy a recorder, I'll buy 2 microphones, and my first episode will be about these soldiers. Yeah. Right. And so that's what the first thing that I produced. I produced something I called Soldier Philosophers, which I followed a few guys, from their experiences in war, reintegrating back into society, and then them moving into thinking about and writing about, killing in warfare or being a soldier. And from that point on, I thought, okay, if I could get some kind of funding to produce a show, that's what I'm going to do. And I got a 1-year fellowship at Duke. And at that point, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I think I'll just try to produce as much as I can. And so I made 10 episodes. And if you've heard the show, like it's wide ranging. It's not like, there's 2 on soldiers, but there's like stuff about the wishes of the dead. There's stuff about, science and parapsychology, Errol Morris and, film and realism and things like that. So I wanted to connect storytelling with almost every aspect that philosophers think about, like, which is a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so the first season is only 10 episodes. I'm hoping to do more.
Well, and so you were working on the Soldier Philosophers thing then before you had the plans to do the whole series, or? That's right.
Wow. I just did it. I just decided to do it, and I just produced it in my attic. And the way it goes is you go out and you record about 15 hours worth of tape and interviews, and then do all this research, and then you have like 45 minutes. So in my case, at least 2 parts. I got 90 minutes out of it. And then I didn't know what to do with it, so I just started applying for fellowships. And the way it works, I don't know if it's like this in the arts, like you apply for funding, but it's like everything that I've discovered is 2% of people respond to you, right?
Yeah,
like you put out 100 things, 2 people, like you tweet at 100 people, 2 people might listen to your show, right? You're one of them, right? So like that's how it works, and that's how it's worked since.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah. So is that kind of how the structure ended up going forward for you, where you discover, did the story always come first, followed by the philosophical idea, or did it ever reverse, or how did that go for the rest of them?
That's a great question. It's half and half, really. Some of the times so I did an episode called The Wishes of the Dead, which follows the story of the Milton Hershey fortune. And that was most certainly philosophy first. Okay. Because there are some issues, not all, but there are some issues where I sort of have feelings about and I have thoughts about. And one of them was that I had walked around for a long time just being really puzzled by is just this idea. Why do we like satisfy the wishes of the dead in our society? Like it's just weird, but nobody thinks about that. But like I was walking around and I thought, I think I may have talked to somebody who worked on a hospital board or something. And they're like, we really need like this $1 million for cancer research. But this donor who's dead now, really wanted it for flowers. Yeah. And so there's nothing we can do about it. And then, things like that happen all the time. And I was like, what do you mean there's nothing you can do about it? This is a dead person after all.
Right.
And then when I started looking into it, then I thought, okay, good. Actually, there's really good stories behind this.
Yeah.
Right. And from those stories, and so I had to, I had, maybe 3 or 4 stories that I could have pursued in relation to that issue. But once I found the stories, I settled on the Milton Hershey fortune. But, in that case, I kind of did all of the philosophy research first, and then I looked for the story, and that worked out very well, I think. In other cases, in the Errol Morris episode, it was one of those instances where I found a piece of philosophy, and Errol had written a little bit about it.
Sure.
And I contacted him, but when we sat down to do an interview, it had nothing to do with that issue. Right?
Right.
And so in that case, I thought, okay, I can't do an episode on that issue.
Yeah.
I have to follow what really concerns Errol.
Yep.
And Errol was this like seething hatred of Thomas Kuhn, right?
Right.
Like that's really, and so I was like, okay, let's talk about that seething hatred of Thomas Kuhn, right? And like, how could somebody have a seething hatred of somebody personally on the basis of a philosophical view that they had?
Right.
Which is right. And so that's sort of what it was.
So that Thomas Kuhn thing wasn't part of what initially attracted. Oh, that's fascinating.
Not even close.
I'd heard his remarks about Thomas Kuhn in some interview years ago, but not to the depth that you had gone into it with him. And I totally thought that you had just stumbled upon like an interview with him like that. But that's fascinating. Yeah.
No. What happened was there's this really obscure story that's a story of mythology from mathematics, which is that a group of the Pythagoreans of the Pythagorean theorem were numerologists, basically. And one of them discovered that they all thought the only numbers there are were whole numbers or fractions. And one of them discovered the square root of 2, and they drowned that guy in the ocean. So that's a story. And actually, so I originally thought that so then the idea of the philosophy behind that would have been something like, what is it? Like, what are these numbers? Like, you discover them? Do you invent them? Right? And Errol actually wrote about that as part of his Kuhn stuff. So I thought I was just going to go talk to Errol Morris about that.
Sure.
But that constituted like 2 minutes of the whole conversation.
Right.
Really, what he couldn't stop talking about was how much he kept hating Kuhn after all of these years.
Right.
And when I came away with that tape, I'm like, okay, it's Errol Morris. I gotta, I got to pursue what it is that he's preoccupied with.
Well, and
so that's an idea.
Yeah, and your reaction to that is very Errol Morris in itself. His whole. I'm a huge fan of his, and that whole idea of letting not overly dictating where this goes. It bears fruit, and it did for you. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But I'd love to get into this a little bit about this combination you had of storytelling and philosophy. So we've been talking about it shorthand. I think a lot of folks have some understanding of shorthand, but how did you even frame that for yourself? Was it a conscious thought of this idea of storytelling and this idea of philosophy are perfect for together or are not perfect for together? How did you start there?
They are very, very not perfect for each other. In fact, if I would say I would go the other way.
Okay.
Right. I would say that I didn't know ahead of time that it would work. Mm-hmm. And if you asked people who do what I do for a living, which is like kind of teach philosophy for a living, they would say there's no way that would work. Right. It's kind of like saying, because philosophy nowadays is a little bit more like math and less like, making films or literary criticism or history even, right? It's a humanities discipline, but people are working on more and more abstract stuff.
Interesting.
Right? That are very disconnected from real life stories. And so it's very hard to connect, right? So like an example, since we already talked about it, was like, here's one philosophical topic people love to talk about. What's a number? Are they discovered or are they invented? Well, it's a real challenge when the preoccupation is with that question to like, what's the relevant story to help connect and motivate that's an interesting question. And that's why I looked at this old story of this guy who was drowned for discovering a number, right?
Yeah.
But that's, how many of those stories are like that? There's like 1,000 philosophical questions. And so it's really hard. It's a challenge. And I was taken in by the storytelling stuff before I knew whether or not it would work, before I before I had any idea whether it would work with philosophy. I thought it wouldn't. And
Yeah.
so when I made those soldiers episodes, the first ones, I didn't know if it was working or not. I was like, so on the one hand, these guys fought in wars and like had arguments about whether to raid this house or that house, and and so on. And then there's these ideas about whether it's moral to kill. I didn't know whether they would connect in any way.
Yeah.
And um, so I had to learn as I was doing stuff how it connects. Like,
Yeah.
how do stories connect with ideas in this way? And one of the things that ended up working, but only works sometimes and not others, is when the conflict of a story rests on assumptions that are philosophical, that people don't question. And once you start questioning it, you'll realize that the conflict is only a conflict because people are making certain assumptions. So The Wishes of the Dead is a great example of that. There's this huge mess that has to do with Milton Hershey's money.
Yeah.
Right? There's fighting and there's suing and there's all this stuff. And it rests on a very, very simple assumption that nobody is questioning. They're just, right? And that assumption is we have an obligation to do what dead people wanted to do with the money that they earned while they were alive. Now, everybody's arguing about what did he really want.
Right.
Nobody's arguing about whether that's true.
Right.
Right. And when you start when you start asking questions like whether that's true, then that's philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. And so the connection between storytelling and philosophy, an effective one that I found is if you can find a story where the conflict rests on an assumption that is a philosophical one, that people don't seem to be questioning or they don't know how to answer, then I think that you have a good connection between the two.
That's really interesting. So I'm just running that through my head a little bit as on a mechanical standpoint. So to take that Hershey example, the conflict, you're saying that the conflict is people arguing about how he wanted to spend his money, not the underlying question. And if you can find those stories where you as the storyteller can direct our eyes towards the more fundamental question, it like collapses the house of cards in a way that's a very compelling kind of interesting narrative in that sense. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that I think is that sort of, as I've been doing this project, the gold standard.
Yeah.
Right? That's why I think that Wishes of the Dead episode was so good, was because, it's very rare that you'll find that.
Yeah.
Like that intimate of a connection between the story and the philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. So, in the Errol Morris episode, the connection is a lot more tenuous. So, the connection really is like there is a personal conflict between two men who were like great men in many respects. And, and I think the question, there's a non-philosophical question, was whether or not it was personal or whether or not it was philosophical first. Right. So like they hated each other and therefore Errol ended up hating the ideas. Right. Or did he hate the ideas and that led him to have this disdain for any human being who could have those ideas? Yeah. I actually think it's the second.
That's interesting.
To a large extent, I actually think that it was the denial of truth in Kuhn that made Errol hate the guy. Yeah. And then the guy being abusive on top of that was, just more. But the philosophical question was really about this issue of whether or not, I don't know, it was about whether or not you can have truth be an aim of like filmmaking and the similarities between that and science. Yeah. Right. And in documentary filmmaking, since you're an Errol Morris fan, this, he sees it very, very intimately as a medium that's no different from science in this respect. You reconstruct from the things that you do as a filmmaker towards a truth. You're not like making it up. You're not building a model of your own perspective. It's nothing like that. Ultimately, you're after truth, at least in documentary filmmaking. And and so I did try to find connections between his film work and the philosophy in a way that he doesn't. He has a little bit of those connections, but he actually said to me, which I didn't make it on the episode. He said, "Making films is making films, and philosophy is philosophy." And he never thought about ever connecting stories with philosophy because it's on a separate, area in his mind. He
Yeah.
doesn't personally see the connection between the story and the philosophy as intimately as I do.
That's interesting. Because
Yeah.
he's like joked that he has in the past, but that's interesting to hear that you don't think that he clearly wasn't in this conversation with you. That's very interesting. On that point for you, it seems like it sounds like the more common experience for you was finding that story first, and then you had the philosophy after it. I wonder if that's just the easier way to go. Ostensibly, if you go forward into a second season, if that's the easier way to go, largely because someone like you're so focused on philosophy all the time anyway that you'll see it in most things anyway. So like if you see a story, maybe it's not very compelling philosophy in this particular story, but it's there somewhere, or maybe it's really compelling over here in this story, and that's the one we should go towards. If you're I assume if you're kind of like almost weighing those in every narrative anyway, that it becomes a little more easier to kind of stumble on those things.
Yeah. It's harder than you think.
Yeah.
Right. There can be amazing stories, and I've come across them all the time, in journalism and history, that are really, really good,
Yeah.
that everybody would love, but you would be surprised that it actually doesn't connect that well with philosophy.
Okay.
And that's more the norm than the exception. And here, I'll tell you why. So what's a huge deal in podcasting in the last 3 years? The true crime part, right? The true crime genre. True crime is huge. Everybody loves to hear about true crime.
Right.
True crime stories are incredibly compelling, but they actually don't raise many philosophical questions, or at least they don't raise difficult ones.
Yeah.
And the reason is most compelling stories are about uncovering facts about what happened and what really happened when we don't have like a record of what really happened. And philosophy is more about, once we settle the facts about what really happened, there are bigger questions that we don't know the answers to.
Yeah.
Right? And many stories are about, like say in true crime, they're not about difficult questions of justice. They're about what really happened. And once we know whether there was a just thing that happened or an unjust thing that happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In philosophy, you want, so here's like a paradigmatic philosophical question. Should people who are in prisons be thought of as being punished or being reformed?
Right.
For what?
Sure.
Right. That's a tough question.
Yeah.
Right. A true crime story doesn't really connect you to that question.
Yeah.
Right. It's more difficult. Like what would be a question? What would be a good story of somebody who was an egregious, like, human being earlier in life, who seems to be a very different human being now that they're later in life? Like, and a good story like that you can tell, that will then raise the question, like, is this person being reformed or are they being punished because what they did was egregious? Suppose they were a serial killer, a mass murderer, or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's hard to find, right? Think about that. That story is harder to find than a mystery about a crime that hasn't been solved yet. So so to answer your question, it's a lot harder to find the right story when you look at all the stories that are out there.
Yeah.
That's the one that's the one that has a good piece of philosophy. Now, if you come to philosophy first, then you still run into that problem, right?
Yeah.
Because you have this philosophy, but like, what's the right story? Will they have good talkers? Will they have people who will talk to you?
Yeah. It's very funny. It's very funny that you mentioned that aspect though about the true crime thing, because I'm actually working on a true crime documentary right now, and you may have actually settled on something that I've been struggling with, because I've been trying to figure out as I go along. You have like long sequences where we're uncovering facts and we're getting the stories moving forward, the narratives moving forward, and then at some point I want to lay over that layer of kind of like, and now what do we all think about all this? But in order to do that, the story has to stop, and we actually pause, and we're gonna like now talk about this, and like character, all the characters now are going to say what they think, and the story does kind of cease to move.
That's right.
and the mechanic. I've never thought of it that way before, but that's yeah. I see the conflict you're talking about there.
Yeah. I mean, one episode that I did that what you're saying reminds me of is I did an episode called The Name of God.
Yeah, loved it.
Yeah, and that was an episode about a woman who was fired. Well, in the press it was as though she was fired for wearing a hijab at an evangelical Christian college. The official story is that she was fired for theological disagreements.
Right.
Right. And you know, I don't think a lot of people bought that. But the philosophical conflict was there was this question whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. And that's a theological question, which I turned into a philosophy question. But what happened was, right, I told that story, there was this conflict, and I paused right in the middle, and then I went on for like 15, 20 minutes right, with a lot of other scholars about that big question. And then I had to end the story after that. Yeah. That ended up working pretty well, I think. But I think it's because my audience was looking for, I always think that, you know, if I say that my show is a show about philosophy that turns stories into ideas, they expect the ideas, right? Yeah. If I go too long about just the story, they're just like, okay, I've listened to this from other things too. Yeah. But in your case, you know, I would, I don't know what it's about the expectation, right?
It is completely. And that's about basically, what you build your particular style or brand to be in that sense. I mean, Errol Morris, I go to his films and I expect the ideas there too. You know, I read his books, I expect those ideas. You know, and it's very funny. Just the one more point on him when you're talking about how you're right that he sees film like as a extension of science almost, that you're reconstructing the stuff. But then you'll read like his book on photography, and he'll freely accept the idea that like by its very creation you are imposing a subjective worldview by setting a frame and like excluding things outside the frame, and you never get to the finish line on any of this. So
no, that's right. That's right.
We'll be right back.
This podcast is produced by Story First Media, a video content production company focused on storytelling. Cultivate your audience with story, then convert them to customers. Let us know about your upcoming video project at www.storyfirstmedia.com.
If you're consuming this content, you're either listening to it as a podcast or you're viewing it as a video because it exists in both forms. If you'd rather watch my guests and I talk over Skype video, you can find this and all subsequent episodes by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Or if you'd rather listen to the conversation, it's available for download wherever you get your podcasts. I really think these conversations are valuable and will only get better as we go on. And having earned your attention means the world to me. These aren't short conversations. So if you have any comments, questions, suggestions for guests or topics, books I should read, etc., please email me at thenatureofstory@gmail.com or get me on Twitter or Facebook at Michael Neelsen. That's Neelsen. All right, back to the interview. I'd love to talk a little bit more. You gave a talk just recently at Duke about your experience with this, and actually a letter that you got from a listener. Would you go through that with me at all on this?
Sure, absolutely. I finished the season, and very shortly after, maybe the day after, I received a letter from a listener that, just to summarize it. Since you heard the shows, you'd be able to comment on this. Yeah. I think the listener was worried that I was sneaking in a worldview. Right. And didn't like that I criticized certain philosophical views. Right. Which I actually rarely did, if you think about it. I did in some episodes. Yeah. But not in all of them. Yeah. And certainly I don't. And he said, and I think the listener said something like, I was worried about, that you were dismissing certain things. And even if I agreed with you, I think that you might be sneaking in a worldview in a way that will exclude people. Right. Or something to that effect. Something to that effect. And so, one of the things that I wanted to do in the first season, at least, and I have to think about whether I want to keep doing it, is to display how a philosopher thinks about certain ideas, right? So I didn't want to just be a journalist and say, here's some person that thinks A and another person who thinks B. And now that you're listening to the story that I've told, think about A and B. Right. A philosopher or a trained philosophy professor like then says, are these good reasons for thinking A? You know, like, and I did that with the wishes of the dead. And like these are the arguments that people give. And I don't think they're very good because I think there are these other considerations and so on. And I did that to small extent in other episodes as well. And a listener was worried about, you know, what people worry about in the media in general. Like, what if you do that, you're going to turn people off and create an echo chamber or something like that.
Right.
And it seems like your show really should be just this really like inclusive presentation of just stuff like other people think and stories and so on. And so it made me think about like what it is to be a show that's storytelling and philosophy at the same time. And that made me think more generally about people who create media like documentaries, like documentary audio, which what I do with, just writing and so on. Because there really are it's really about narrative voice, right? Are you a narrative voice that is going to be a character, a strong character, an opinionated character in the stories that you're telling? Or are you going to have this detached, impartial, balanced perspective? And, in media criticism, like I said in that talk, 101, the idea that there is a detached, balanced perspective is kind of like, well, not really, because you're editing things in a certain way. If I said, if you watch Errol Morris's movies, he is not narrating, but he's editing.
Right.
And probably for the more sophisticated media consumer, getting your point across through structuring and editing is way more effective than coming on as a blowhard and saying, now, climate change is going to happen and you're contributing to the, and so on. So it's not like you're impartial and detached, right? And so on. And so what that made me think about was like, why do people prefer the impartial, detached when they do?
Right.
And some people, and why do others prefer the more blowhardy, really opinionated, narrator? Like, what is it about the styles of narration? Is it just the style? Or is there really something underlying it that is, one way is more truthful and the other way is more biased or something like that? Or is it something else? And I'm wrestling with those questions right now because I think about things abstractly, right? This is an abstract question, but the repercussions are, what kind of narrator do I want to be when I'm creating my own content? And my working hypothesis right now is that I think that at the end of the day, blowhardy, opinionated narration is not in itself a bad thing with respect to whether or not you're more truthful or less truthful.
Right.
I think that somebody who's strongly opinionated but is right and has evidence on their side is actually better from the point of view of truth than somebody who knows all of the truths, but then says, oh, okay, but I'm going to be balanced and detached.
Sure.
Because reality is not necessarily balanced and detached.
Right.
So that's what I'm sort of thinking at the moment. I'm not convinced fully by this, but in that talk, what I talked about was, but maybe there's like an aesthetic appreciation that people have, right? It's kind of like, I just like the way, symphony sounds versus punk rock, there's just something about the poetry of of a less blowhardy filmmaker. Like, Errol is he's an artistic filmmaker.
Right.
But in addition to an artistic filmmaker, there's something about not having his voice being imposed that contributes to that artistry. Right. And I think that has an effect on people when they're consuming this kind of thing, where they're mistaking it for impartiality.
Right.
But anyways, I'm gonna let you ask a question.
No, that's great. I'm exactly. I was thinking these thoughts as you were saying them. I when I read that letter, my first thought was that, like you said, I too have come to a place just in my life as an artist. I've come to a comfort to some degree or another that no matter how hard I try, I can never achieve objectivity anyway. So I'm not going to beat myself up over it trying to get there. But what responsibility do I have to keep myself in check in some way, in a responsible manner? But I agree with you that I don't think you did anything in any part of the show that was exclusive to any other ideas or anything like that. But you were merely honest, though, about, I felt at least emotionally honest about where you were in the debate, and that was great, I thought. And I don't know what else. I guess I'd come in it from the place of an artist. I don't know what other obligation to an audience someone has other than honesty.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think what in this political climate, I think there's a worry about people who are too confident.
Yes, I agree with that.
Right?
Yes.
And so I think that so that's a concern, right? That's definitely a concern. But the question is for you and for me is what is bad about confidence?
Right.
If there is something, if there is something bad about it. And, so let me answer that question first before I move on, right? What is bad about confidence? Well, confidence is bad if it's a misplaced confidence, right?
Right.
But is confidence bad if it's not misplaced?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're if you're a filmmaker and you said you're doing a true crime or whatever you're investigating in that process, you have a lot of evidence.
Sure.
You have a lot more evidence than anybody else.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
You have a lot of evidence, and you're going to be confident about some things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And are you going to feign humility about those things?
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
That you know more about.
Yeah.
On the other hand, so now let me push back on the other end of that. But what if we think about confidence not as an issue with, like, I call it, since I'm a philosopher, I say an epistemic issue,
right.
Which is like you have no right to be as confident as you are because you don't know stuff.
Right.
Well, what if you do know stuff?
Right.
Right. But what if we just think about it as an aesthetic point, right? Okay, even if you should be as confident as you are because you just know all this more stuff than other people know, maybe you want to connect with people because there is an aesthetic quality to humility. Right? And so that's what I'm thinking about. Like, maybe there is an aesthetic quality to humility, just like there's an aesthetic quality to not having a narrator tell you what's going on.
Right.
And that aesthetic quality is what people are responding to when they respond to an Errol Morris or when they respond to a This American Life, as opposed to a Michael Moore.
Right. Completely. Yeah.
Right. Like, Michael Moore might have all the on his side. He's probably right about a lot of things.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Or Gladwell's a different kind of case, right? Because he's like both very certain and also incorrect about a lot of things. I don't want to bash on Gladwell. He's correct about a lot of things too, but he'll admit that he fudges the facts. So I'm interested in that exploration, actually.
Yeah.
Like, what is involved in the detached, like, there's an artistry that people like about Errol Morris.
Right.
In addition to the fact that there's no blowhardiness in it.
Yep.
And maybe that's a good thing too. Maybe that's a virtue, right? Maybe even though I know a hell of a lot more and I know that this guy didn't commit the murder and this other guy did.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get on the end of the thin blue line and say it.
Right.
In fact, I'm not ever going to depict as part of the reenactments in the thin blue line what I think really happened.
Right.
Which he never did.
Right.
Right. And I'm not even going to have the person who confessed to it actually say I did murder.
Right.
Like, it's all subtle. Everything is subtle.
Right.
Even though he knows what happened right, better than anybody else. That's why he got the guy free.
Right.
But he still. So why did he do that? I think it was an artistic choice, and not necessarily an epistemic choice. It wasn't because he didn't know. It's because as an artistic choice, what he did may have been much more like beautiful is not the right word, but like the right thing to present, the right picture to present. Like that was the right picture to present about that case. And maybe after that, it's even more persuasive. Yeah. Right. Than somebody actually coming at you and saying all the facts and so on. So that's what made that one letter made me think. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think you settled on it at the end there. You know, that in that case for the Thin Blue Line, perhaps that made it more persuasive. I usually find that to be kind of the Rosetta Stone for me in getting out of some of these quandaries when I'm thinking about them, about, you know, how confident can I be in making this claim with this piece or whatever. I usually come back to, well, okay, outside of all that, what am I actually trying to do here? Am I trying to actually convince somebody off of their preconceived notion, or am I preaching to the choir, or am I doing whatever? Like, because they all kind of require different styles. And if I'm preaching to the choir, I'll go up there and, you know, completely, you know, it doesn't matter at all at that point. You know, we'll sing the truth if we want to or whatever. But yeah, if I'm actually trying to, and I think this may have been where Errol Morris was, you know, he's talking about a case that at that time society had ruled on, you know, I mean, it's like, so now he's trying to push people off preconceived notions, and maybe a more subtle push is kind of what was required. But with what you're doing, I guess I'd be curious, how did you frame what you were trying to do up front with this podcast?
I was trying to get people to, I don't know, I'm not quite sure of what the preconceived notion of what philosophy is, but I was told that it's negative. Right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that it's this kind of like narrow elite thing that people partake in that nobody else cares about. Right. And my first goal was I want to try to get people to care about it, right, by bringing it in a way that they already care about, which is good storytelling. Yeah. And so trying to get people to care about what I don't think they do care about, right, through storytelling was the first thing that I thought. So now I don't know if that's true. I don't want to say that, you know, because it might be like I'm giving people, I'm being too hard on people. Right? Sure. Like maybe they don't think about it at all. Maybe they don't care, right? Like maybe they don't have these stereotypes. So I was trying to bring people to this field that I think has something to offer them, in their form of thinking, that wouldn't otherwise, you know, like it or something like that. That's one of the things. And the other thing was in that process, so I wanted to make philosophical issues seem relevant. And then the other thing was that I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just me reporting on philosophical views or what philosophy is, but actually displaying a bit of the thinking that we do. Right? And so those were the two goals. I never had a goal of like, this is going to be a microphone for me to spread my work in any way. And that's far from the truth, because most of the episodes that I do, I know very little about. Right? Like I did a show on the philosophy of music, and I knew nothing about the philosophy of music or that kind of music even, really. And so because that was my goal, I did want to be inclusive in the audience. I didn't want to, like, you know, sound like a blowhard, you know, like political, you know, someone who was on a political spectrum. Right. Even though a lot of times certain views, you know, are paired with the political spectrum, like which political spectrum you're on. So that was really my goal. My goal was to bring people to it, philosophy, and then to exhibit to them what it was like through through storytelling. Yeah. And then the last goal was to convince, you know, people out there who that you know, like philosophy, to convince the people in philosophy that, you know, you should integrate storytelling into your own work too, because like it has something to offer. So I was trying to get people to philosophy, and I was trying to get people to storytelling from different sides of it.
That's great. Well, and I want to get to the second part of that in a moment, but sticking on the first part first, do you find it helpful when we're talking about that kind of question that you're wrestling with about confidence, like how much confidence is good, or is confidence even good if you're right, and all these things? Do you find that rechecking your ultimate goal helps in that as well, or have you kind of gone somewhere else? Like, do you find that thinking about whether or not you're trying to convince somebody or just tell them something they already know or whatever?
I am by my nature a pretty skeptical person.
Yeah.
I'm not generally a very confident person, so it's easier for me to check than other people, to check myself. I think that people need to know themselves very well to know how much they should check themselves when it comes to being overconfident about stuff. If you are like generally not a blowhardy person in life, right, and that you tend to be somebody who reserves judgment.
Yeah.
You tend to be somebody who's pretty skeptical about things. Then I think then I'm not worried about you. Sure, you're going to slip up. Sure, some of the times you're going to be overconfident about something,
right.
and then people are going to call you out on it. But you're not going to end up being, a propagandist,
right?
A
charlatan,
a charlatan in that way. And I'm generally a pretty skeptical person, especially and self-critical person, right? So I've in the work that I've been doing this last year of creating these 10 episodes, I've had the opposite problem. I couldn't make deadlines for myself because I was just too worried about how people are just going to think this is fake and phony and they're going to see right through it and all this stuff, right? And they'll call me on all this stuff. And that didn't happen, but so I have the opposite kind of problem. And I think I will continue to as well. But, people who are really sure of themselves need to surround themselves with people who, argue with them and push them and disagree with them all the time. And if you're more skeptical and have a very hard time meeting deadlines because you're worried too much then you need to surround yourself with people who are a lot more sure about themselves, even if they do disagree, because they help put you in check.
That's great advice. I'm gonna take some of that myself. Yeah, I personally definitely lean more towards that other way as well, where I've had to ask myself more often, what responsibility do I have to, because my particular story has guys who are in prison currently as well, and I think to myself, what responsibility do I have to be actually more forceful about whether I think they don't deserve to be there or not. Even there, you heard me hedging even just in what I said.
Yeah.
There's I rarely say the word prove. I want to say suggest. I rarely say I have the opposite thing as well. But that's good advice though, that you got to have people around who balance out the other end of it.
Yeah, I think you do. I think that I think you should keep being that way.
Yeah.
Don't stop being that way. Just it's better to surround yourself if you have other producers or assistants or who tend to be a little bit more strongly opinionated, especially if you're leading the project. Because if you have a bunch of ditherers, I tend to be a ditherer too, about all these moral questions and things like that.
Yep.
You can get paralyzed pretty quickly.
Yes. Yes. No, I one of my producers almost got into an argument with one of our subjects at one point, and I never would have gone there. And I was definitely. So you got those people around, and it's very helpful. The other side of it, though. So your fellow philosophers, your fellow professors, people who are on your level listening to this, how has the reception been in that regard?
Surprisingly more positive than I thought it would be.
That's great.
Yeah, from all the ones who I've interacted with, very positive. So, they, again, I don't know how much of the field is actually listening to it. It's enough that I've been getting, regular feedback.
Yeah.
And it's been very, very positive. Number one, I think that nobody thought it could be done, right? It sounds flaky. Before I did this, it sounds like somebody saying, if somebody came up to you and said, "Oh, you're a filmmaker. I want to make a film about poetry, dance, and prisons," right? Or something like that. You would be like, "Okay, good, right, great." That's how it sounded to people ahead of time, right? It sounded like, first there's people who do nonfiction in narrative, and that's art or whatever. And philosophy is this serious, hardcore, whatever, discipline.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, so it surprised people because like in my professional work, I'm actually pretty technical, like a technical, like my expertise is pretty technical. So not coming from somebody, who was actually pretty rigorous in his work in academia, I think may have helped. So they're open to it. They're a lot more open to it. And of course, like then there's like people who just ignore you, but like, that happens everywhere.
Right.
So I still don't ever think that people will think of it as serious philosophy.
Sure.
They'll think of it as like popularizing philosophy, which I sort of see it right now. I think there's room for it to be serious philosophy myself. I haven't exhibited that yet. But when I say serious philosophy, I mean like something that makes a breakthrough in somebody's thinking about something, right? I think I think it has the potential to be that. Now, that I haven't convinced people of yet because I haven't done it yet. But like I might go ahead and try to do that, right? I try to say, okay, there's something that like we couldn't otherwise have come to some breakthrough on without doing it through like storytelling and audio or something like that. I mean, like obviously when you do like music, for instance, like philosophy of music, that's going to happen. Like you can't just write an essay about music and like think that you're going to have as much impact as somebody who like you can actually do it through audio.
Right.
But I'm starting to think that you can even do it through storytelling also. I don't know yet. I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. But it's been the reception has been very, like their philosophy. I sent pitches out. I said, do you have a like work that you think connects with stories? And people have been pitching as a result. Cool. So that's a good thing. And then they're also going to be using it in their courses, the podcast.
Oh, that's great.
As an introduction, and so hopefully that'll bring in like quite a bit of downloads also, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you have a class of 400 kids and you're studying, the ethics of war, then you're going to have like 800 downloads right there, right?
Yeah. So, and hopefully they multiply each one of themselves. So you got little captive audiences. That's helpful.
Yeah.
You put butterflies in my stomach when you were talking about the idea of potentially being able to really get at something and move the conversation forward philosophically with some concept through storytelling. I would never have been, I would never have thought to push it to that level, but it's fascinating to hear you as someone self-described as being more on the rigorous, less abstract maybe thinking of philosophy, but the more nuts and bolts of it. That potential thrills me. The idea that the storytelling itself could be a tool that like scientifically allows you to get somewhere you couldn't have gotten otherwise.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
I don't know what form that's going to take.
Right.
And it's also going to depend on which area in philosophy we're talking about.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's going to happen like with mathematics, like philosophy of mathematics. What's a number? Are they discovered?
Right.
But, there's a lot of philosophy that's surrounding consciousness, the emotions, the mind in general. And that I think that the experience of engaging in listening to stories and hearing them will give you a kind of insight that you couldn't get just by abstractly thinking about those kinds of questions, which is what philosophers do, right? Like not a lot of them, some of them do, but not a lot of them actually engage in like hands-on research in the mind, right? They most of the time they read some research from the psychologist or neuroscience, and then they sit around, they think up really hard and say, oh, I think this says that consciousness is this.
Right.
And I think this says that emotions are this. Right?
Yeah.
That's what we do. And why couldn't the role of storytelling play the same kind of role, right? Or an even better role. There's actually like research into storytelling, right? Like and the cognitive science of all that. It's all in its infancy, but we know that storytelling is how human beings communicate. Mm-hmm. We know that stories about human beings are a lot more compelling to humans than stories about non-human beings, right? We know that when you tell stories about non-human beings, if you give them a physical form that's like different, like you have a talking tree, that's okay. But if you have a tree that is completely unlike people mentally, that's not okay.
Right.
Like like characters have to be like humans in their thinking, right? We know all of these really interesting things about storytelling that from the cognitive sciences. And like that's actually storytelling informing something in the sciences,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
And so there's no reason why it can't inform all these other areas too.
I've been fascinated to watch that stuff, and we had Kendall Haven on a while ago, and he's been great writing a lot about that sort of stuff. But I've actually been fascinated, and I'm trying to dig deeper into what's currently happening, because a lot of the people I've taught to were part of kind of like the 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when like the Department of Defense was funding a whole bunch of this stuff, the research into storytelling, which I found fascinating too. That basically prior to that, there was no entity big enough that just would commission large batches of research on story as a thing. It was all peripherally with other parts of neuroscience. That's really interesting to me. But yeah, I whenever you feel like you're close to figuring a way that storytelling hosts this, I'll be fascinated to hear more.
Awesome.
So I guess to wrap this up just a little bit, where forward? You seem to kind of want to do a season 2, but you're not sure. What are the variables there?
I am committing myself to a season 2.
Oh, okay.
But I don't have enough. I don't know how it's going to work out financially. I have a full-time job. I teach at Vassar College, where I'm tenured there, and I can't do it on the full-time while doing the full-time job. So if I don't go full-time so that I can do a season 2, I need funding. I need enough. I don't need a lot, but I need enough. And so I'm still working on that, but I'm going to try to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I think the season, I already have all of this stuff for season 2. So I'm going to put together some episodes.
Yeah.
Whether or not I can do 10, I probably couldn't, because I'm going back to, but I eventually want, if the show, I would like to do this show, I would like to have one season a year until I've said as much as I wanted to say. How that's going to happen, it's really hard to know. Like in this world today, people who are doing, high production shows, they are doing it out of, like they're funded by public radio, or they're funded by Gimlet or Panoply or something like that, right? That's sort of what they do. And my sense is that they are kind of farming their talent in-house. They're kind of like people who have been in radio for a while. They're going to be like, what kind of show do you want to do? Let's try to see if we can make that show happen. So I don't know if there's a place for outsiders who are doing something similar with a mission to be part of that. But I don't know. I'm going to explore. There's no, I'll pitch these places, but there's, like I say, you put out 100 pitches and 2% of people will get back to you even.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Welcome to the world of the starving artist now. Yeah. Finding the time outside the full-time job and everything. Yeah. That's right. That's where we all are. Well, I won't keep you much longer. I really appreciate the time. I'm very excited to see where you go forward with all these projects and season 2. It'll be fantastic. You've been listening to The Nature of Story. I'm Michael Neelsen. You can listen to Barry's podcast, Hi-Phi Nation, on iTunes, SoundCloud, or at hiphination.com. This podcast was produced by Story First Media, a video content production company focused on storytelling. Our editor is Ryan Smith. Original music composed by Alexander Valdez. Until next time, I'm Michael Neelsen.